What's up everybody, back with another raid guide, and today we're taking a look at normal/heroic Lords of Dread. The Dread Lords are among us? One face fight with two intermissions-ish. For this, you'll face off against Mal'Ganis and Quintessa, each with their own abilities, including an ultimate or intermission, if you will, that they'll use when one of them reaches full energy. Now, the main mechanics of this fight is the Cloud of Carrion and the Fearful Trepidation. So Cloud of Carrion, Mal'Ganis targets several players, for us this was 2, and they get a 5-yard circle around them, and a dot that deals ever increasing damage, and it will jump to any player that gets within 5 yards of the Carrion debuffed player. However, when it jumps to a new player, it resets its damage amp and starts fresh, so you will need to rotate these all the time throughout the fight. Now, on Heroic, whenever you lose the debuff, you also get another debuff that lasts for 8 seconds, which increases Carrion damage by 100% and it stacks. This is just so you can't rotate these between 2 players on Heroic, and to make it more annoying if something goes wrong. Now, on top of this, when it jumps to a new player, that player gets disoriented for 1 second. So this can actually be used to piss off healers during their cooldowns. But here is where the Fearful Trepidation comes into play, or fear circles as I'll call them. Targets 2 players, giving them a 10-yard purple circle around them, and after 8 seconds they'll fear anyone or anything within that circle. However, if you happen to fear a player with Carrion Cloud circle around you, you instead spook the insects away, removing the debuff completely, and they don't get feared. However, doing so, like I said, will fear the little bugs instead, causing them to shoot out of the player like a slow-moving insecty projectile, and if any player touches this, they get a new Carrion Cloud debuff, and the projectile does not go away if someone gets hit, so multiple players can get Carrion from one projectile. Cue the picture! So to counter this, you want players targeted by fear circles to instantly run out into range, and players with Carrion needs to run in and position themselves inside the fear circle a bit without overlapping their green circles on top of each other or the fear circle player, and then spread instantly and start dodging the green projectiles. We tried having most players with green circles turn their character towards the boss to minimize projectiles going there, but I can't actually confirm if that helped or if it was just wishful thinking. I recommend having one ranged DPS keep a track of all projectiles moving towards melee and call it out, so melee can position themselves ahead of time to avoid having tons of circle spawn in melee. And if one does get hit, I recommend having a healer or range run into melee and pick up the debuff and move it out. And lastly, melee players who get targeted by fear circles, sucks to be you. As soon as you get it, you need to run out. Even though you have to AFK for 8 seconds outside, it is still worth it as it makes it so much easier for all the green circles to position themselves. Don't be greedy, just get out. Now on top of this, there's a few minor mechanics as well, like Slumber Cloud. Every now and then Quintessa will spawn a sleepy cloud that travels around the room. Step into it and you fall asleep. Now it spawns near a player's location, and it seemed to always be one in melee, one in range, so I highly advise to bait these, especially in melee. We had all our melee stack up on the left side of the bosses to always spawn a cloud at their left leg, if you will, so they could instantly move out, and then we drag the bosses away from the cloud. Range can bait near old clouds to minimize the amount of space you use. Now there's also an ad called Inoculate Shadow that'll spawn somewhere in the room with 1 health, and a buff that reduces their damage taken by 90%, and they can't die. However, this ad will just spam cast Ravenous Hunger, which deals a bit of raid-wide damage but also heals the ad for 15% of its max HP. Once it's reached full health, the debuff is removed and you can now DPS and kill the ad. So the idea is, it spawns, you let it cast its Ravenous Hunger a few times. When it's at full health, then you knock or grip it into melee and nuke it down, while still interrupting any and all of the Ravenous Hungers after it's been healed to full health to minimize raid damage. Next out, for you tanks out there, Quintessa and Mal'Ganis each have their own frontal tank slap. Bosses needs to be tanked next to each other but aimed in such a way that tanks don't slap each other, or melee for that matter. We did this simply by having one of the bosses slightly aimed to the side. Now Mal'Ganis will cast Leeching Claw, which deals a large amount of fist damage and a debuff that reduces healing taken by 25% for 20 seconds. On top of this, if Leeching Claw hits a target debuffed by Leeching Claw, Mal'Ganis heals for 10%. Quintessa on the other hand uses Anguishing Strikes, Heavy fist damage, but also applies a dot that deals a high amount of shadow damage every second, and it lasts for 18 seconds, and it stacks. So yeah, make sure they're aimed properly and taunt swap after every leeching claw. Now on top of this, once Mal'Ganis or Quintessa reaches full energy, an intermission starts, or an ultimate if you will. Mal'Ganis will always start, and upon reaching 100 energy, both Quintessa and Mal'Ganis turns into swarms of insects and swirl around at the location they started its cast. During this, both bosses take 100% increased AoE damage, and both deal a metric ton of raid-wide damage every second, and this lasts for 20 seconds. So pretty much a stack up on top of bosses, AoE and heal away. Healers, you want healing cooldowns to cover this, as its damage is pretty insane. Now on top of this, keep an eye for any green projectiles, as you do not want the entire raid to get carry on during this. Now if a player has a green circle, make sure to be outside of the bosses a bit, and do not, whatever you do, pass it to a healer, as they'll get stunned for a second and that'll make him real salty and the raid might die. Now on the flip side, when Quintessa reaches 100 energy, she'll cast Infiltration Dread. Insert random Among Us pun? Man, I never played the game. Now when this happens, both bosses disappear and infiltrate two random non-tank players. Everyone in the raid becomes hostile to each other, and the name of the game is suspiciously similar to Among Us. So 2 players will be infiltrated, and up to 5 non-tank players can see these infiltrated players. They will be slightly bigger and have a huge dreadlord coming out of their shoulders. However, to make this more difficult, the 2 players who are being infiltrated will also see 2 random non-infiltrated players as infiltrated. So the only way to know for sure who has actually been infiltrated and who isn't is by having 3 or more players confirm the same players. So for example, we have Bob and Stankie who's been infiltrated, and 5 other players who can see these. None of us know who it is, but since there's only 2 of us who are infiltrated, we might both say X and Y player is sus. But then we hear the other 3 to 5 players say no, it's actually Bob and Stankie, and as soon as it's been confirmed by 3 players or more, you know you're right. Most likely. Too big brain? Anyways, once you know who has been infiltrated, nuke him down and intermission ends. Failure to do so within 30 seconds wipes the raid. Now, a few helpful tips for this. First of all, as soon as you get into this phase, turn off enemy nameplates. So make sure you have a bind for that so you can do it fast. Stop any and all damage instantly. DPSers with on-ground AoE effects like Boomkin Starfall can use a slash cancel or a macro for this to minimize raid damage. Or just pad away. And like I mentioned, when infiltration phase starts, not everyone in the raid will be able to see who is and who isn't infiltrated. It's around 5 players. Might differ in raid size, 5 is what I've been told from literally everyone. However, if one of those chosen happens to be a demon hunter, they can apparently use Spectral Sight to instantly see which players are actually infiltrated. I have not tried this myself, but other players have confirmed it, so hopefully it checks out. Not something you can really plan or play around, but demon hunters should use Spectral Sight anytime that phase starts, just in case. And yeah, that's pretty much it for all the mechanics and abilities. This just repeats over and over and over until the bosses die, or you hit enrage. Only difference is the damage and everything keeps ramping up. After each intermission or ultimate, the corresponding boss gets a buff. Mal'Ganis, after his swarms, deals 10% more plague damage, and his carrion circle dot ticks faster, and Quintessa gains 10% shadow damage, and her sleepy clouds grow a bit bigger, and all of these stack, so eventually the bosses slap pretty damn hard. All the AoEs hurt, the dot hurts, and the sleep clouds are very big indeed. And lastly, you want to make sure to kill both of these bosses roughly at the same time, because when one of them dies, the raid starts taking increasing ticking damage that just ramps up, so you don't want a big difference on HP between the both of them. But yeah, that's it for this fight on normal and heroic. We'll of course be making a mythic guide once we get to them on mythic. Now if you have any questions at all about this encounter, hit me up in the comments or become a patron or Twitch sub and get access to the Stankie Discord, where you can find raid week auras, our healing notes, and stuff like that. Don't forget the usual stuff: like, comment, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It really helps me out. I'm also streaming all of our progression on Twitch, so make sure to check that out. It's on Thursdays and Sundays now. And I raid with a Swedish guild, so comms will be a bit Swinglish. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.